Okay, so I'd like to start off by saying thank you everyone for coming. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're going to be covering the essentials of Onshape. And what we really want to do here is put together a webinar that really covers, the at the highest level an overview of the entire process in Onshape, from part modeling to assemblies to drawing creation. So we wanted to create a webinar that really covers all of these different areas and just really at a high level walks you through each different step in the process. So the essentials of Onshape, really intended for those maybe just getting started. Maybe you have a little bit of CAD experience, but you're just getting started with Onshape and trying to understand the workflow and the process. As I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. As I'm going through this, I'll do my best to stop and answer any questions that you have. I'll stick around after the webinar is over and make sure to answer any questions as well. So again, ask any questions that you'd like as we're going through this. So let's dig in. Now, there are a few things I like to mention for those new users out there about Onshape in general before we get into the topic of the day. And then the first is our mission statement, and that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And if you haven't used Onshape on a mobile device, like an iPad or an iPhone or an Android phone or an Android tablet, it's really a purpose-built CAD tool now, instead of just being a viewer or limited to certain capabilities in the past. We really have the ability to edit and do full model creation on a mobile device, and also not just mobile devices, but Linux, Chromebooks, Mac, Windows. Really, it's not we're not dependent on any certain operating system or type of hardware. So working together with CAD on any device, anywhere, that's our mission. Now, some things I like to mention about Onshape in general. The first thing I always like to mention is we do have all three major pieces of a professional 3D CAD system, and that's, of course, parts, assemblies, and drawings. Some things that are unique about Onshape is that we're evolving very quickly. So you'll see Onshape move very fast. In fact, versions come out, new updates of Onshape come out very quickly, roughly every 3 weeks. And it's something the user isn't, even aware of unless they're looking at our blog posts or see a new button in the interface. The user doesn't have to do anything. They're always on the latest version. So parts, assemblies, and drawings, all three major pieces are built in, and they're evolving very quickly. Now, some other things I always like to point out with Onshape, version control is built in. I'm going to show you an example of this in just a bit, but you don't have to manage versions separately with a separate application or separate software. It's built into the core functionality of Onshape. I'm going to show you how this works in just a bit. The other thing I always like to point out, if you have experience with other CAD software, if you have files in other formats, chances are we can read and write a lot of the common CAD formats that you have. So if you have a lot of the industry standard, Step, IGES, Parasolid, even the native formats like SolidWorks and Inventor and so on, we can import and read that data natively. So you can get those solid bodies into Onshape, and you can also export to many of those formats as well. So Onshape works well alongside another CAD system because of this ability to import and export a lot of these standard formats. So read and write common CAD formats. You can import and export common CAD formats. Now, the last thing I want to mention is collaboration. If you haven't shared an Onshape document yet, I definitely recommend it. It's one of the biggest benefits of going with a cloud-based solution like this is you can have multiple people working together in real time. 2 or 3 people can build an assembly instead of just one. So, entirely new methods of collaboration because of the fact that it's a web-based app. It opens up all kinds of possibilities with regards to collaboration. So definitely worth checking out. If you haven't shared your document yet, I'll show you an example of this in just a bit. Okay, so those are the things I like to mention about Onshape in general for the new user. Now, what are we going to talk about today? And really the goal today is pretty simple. We're going to tour the interface. We're going to build a simple part. Then, of course, assemble it into our bike frame. And then we're going to create a drawing of our simple part. So we're going to really at a high level walk through each step in the process. Now, at the end, I'm going to walk you through an import. It's a very simple thing to do. In fact, it's just an icon that you'll see. But and then as I'm going through this again, I always say ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog, and you go to webinar panel, type in anything you'd like. I'll do my best to answer them as we're going through this. Okay, so I have one last slide for you, and that is 5 things. So if you had 5 things to take from this webinar, these are the 5 key things that I think that the new Onshape user should know. The first thing is Onshape runs 100% in the browser. There is no install for your desktop, your laptop, those devices. It runs in the browser. So again, this could be Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Safari. One important thing is it needs to support WebGL, which means Internet Explorer is not a good option. It's not a supported browser. So important thing to point out if you're using Internet Explorer. But other than that, most modern web browsers today support WebGL, and that's what we need to run. So again, Onshape itself runs 100% in the browser. A document in Onshape, and this is an important thing for a new user, a document is a container for the entire project. So one document can have hundreds, thousands of parts, sub-assemblies, top-level assembly, drawings, and anything else that you'd like. So one document is a container for many different things. Think of it as a container for your whole project. There are different tabs. I'm going to walk through this in just a bit, but in the Onshape document, you're going to have different tabs for parts, assemblies, drawings, and even miscellaneous files that you've imported. The last 2 things, sharing and collaboration, are built in. I'm going to go over this in just a bit, and data management is built in. So these last two are definitely pretty important because they don't involve a lot of third-party viewers and emails and a lot of extra work to share or collaborate. And it also means you don't need a PDM system in many situations to manage your data in Onshape, right? Because those functionalities are built into the core. Okay, so enough slides. Let's jump into it. Now, what I'd like to do is just walk you through a real simple example of creating a part. But before we get there, I want to point out that in this situation, I'm actually running on Mac. As I mentioned before, you could be running on Windows, Linux, Chromebooks, and again, the mobile apps as well. So you really have accessibility from anywhere. Now, I want to point out again, this runs in the browser. I'm running Chrome. You could be running Safari, Firefox. It's really up to you which browser you choose. But here you'll see I have an Onshape tab loaded. Okay. Now, when you first create your Onshape account, you're going to be taken to what we refer to as the Documents page. Now, the Documents page, accessible under cad.onshape.com, is a list of your documents. Okay? Think of this as just your big top-level list of all your projects, right? And so you have, mountain bike frame, and I have all these different projects, each with parts, assemblies within them. Now, when you first log in, you're going to be greeted with the Documents page, which is just a list filtered by most recently opened. Okay? You have other filters on the left, like My Documents and Created by Me, right? So you can filter by Created by Me. And then you have other options like Shared with Me and teams or companies that you may belong to. And this just simplifies the sharing process. So you have other filters, ways of filtering through your different document list. But the important ones for the new user are public and tutorials and samples. These 2 filters are great resources if you're the type that likes to learn from watching others. In the public models, for example, you'll find thousands of examples of how to build different things. So here's a robotic arm that was modeled in Onshape, and you can open up the model and view the steps that they took to build that arm. So it's a great resource for the new user trying to learn, how others might model certain things. So public models are a great resource. You also have tutorials and samples. Tutorials and samples, like the name implies, gives you tutorials, and then within these are sample models to work with. So if you're just getting started, have no idea what's going on, you may be new to CAD in general, definitely recommend starting with the Onshape tour, building your first part, making an assembly, and then of course creating a drawing of it. But these 2 filters you'll see on the left are very useful for the new user. Also, an important one to point out is trash. At the bottom here, as you're creating documents and you decide to move them to trash or to remove them, you'll first move them to trash, an important step, and then empty the trash. Very important thing to point out, especially for those users using the free account. Make sure to empty the trash after moving it to the trash or emptying the trash. So very important things to point out. You do have the filters here on the left for the documents page. Moving up here, you have the create icon. Pretty straightforward. This creates a new document. Now, as I mentioned before, a document is not a single model or a single part. It's a folder, think of it as a container that will hold everything. It could be, PDFs, spreadsheets, all parts, assemblies, drawings. It could be any number of different combinations of things. So think of it as a project level container. So you have the create, and you also have import. Now, I mentioned before, we can import a number of different formats. And this is how you do it. You'll see a big import button. You just browse to any one of those formats, any one of those files that you have. Choose import, and it'll import into an Onshape document. So very easy to do. So the last things I want to point out about the documents page before I jump into a document are on the top right here. You have notifications, very useful for importing and different things that you get notified for in Onshape. But more importantly, the help. Just to the right of that is a little question mark. And so the common question is, the pop-up, how do I get to help? How do I find the videos? How do I find the keyboard shortcuts? All of those things are under the help menu here. So in the top right, you'll see help, which of course takes you to our help, our link to our videos and tutorials, a link to the forums, a great place to ask questions, our keyboard shortcuts, another one that commonly comes up, where are your keyboard shortcuts, and then of course we have our about. So help menu, very useful for those just getting started. The last thing with the documents page is the top right. You'll have your username, and if you go to manage account, you'll have all the settings for your account. So email settings, preferences, security. So if you want to change your password, or if you want to enable two-factor authentication, all those different things are under account settings. Okay, so enough of the documents page. Let's jump into a document. Now, when you actually open a document, in this case, I've opened an already created document called mountain bike frame. This is where you really get the work done, right? The documents page is just a list, but when you go into one of those documents, just left click in the documents page and it opens. That's where you actually get your work done, whether you're doing assemblies, drawings, building parts, all of that is done here. So some things I want to point out about the interface in general. First, starting at the top left here, you have the Onshape logo. If you click this, it takes you back to the documents page. Okay, so it's an easy way to close the document. Okay, so we'll jump back in it. Moving our way over, we have the document menu with options like rename and copy. So if you're trying to rename or copy the document, also change the units. That's another commonly asked question. How do I change the units of this document? You can do that here. You can also do that globally in the account settings I was showing you just a moment ago. So if you want to change the units for all future documents, you can do that under account settings. You also have options to set properties and so on. Moving over here, we have the version manager. And I mentioned before, version control is built in. So it's very easy in Onshape if you want to capture a major milestone in your design to save a version. So you'll see here, big button, save version. This creates a snapshot of the entire document. All parts, assemblies, drawings, anything else that's in the document, it creates a snapshot of. And you can always go back and look at this version in the future, right? Which makes it a useful tool if you're creating, let's say, revision A, and you have all these associated models, and you want to be able to go back and look at revision A in the future. Now, save version is very nice because it's version controlled, major milestones. But what's important to point out about this is there is no save icon. So one of the first things the new user will notice is there's no save. Everything you do in Onshape is saved, and there's not a need for an icon for that. Now, to show you this, there's history, right? So if you click history, you'll see a step-by-step history of the creation of this document, going all the way back to the moment it was created. Now, the way to think of this is essentially like an infinite undo. because I can go back to any one of these steps and restore the document. Right? So it's an important thing to point out. You have history, which lists every single step, going all the way back to where the document was created, and you can restore back to any one of those steps. Right? So the history is a useful tool, but the main thing I want to point out here is that everything you do in Onshape is saved. And so if you decide that you want the last hour, for instance, you don't care for, you made some mistakes, you can't figure out what's wrong, you can always go back and restore back to an hour ago, right, to the last thing that was working. So again, don't be afraid to change things. Don't be afraid to try things out, because you have the history to go back to any moment in the document. So you have the document name, and moving over here, I have a debug menu. This is specific to Onshape users for troubleshooting. Then you have the comments icon. Now, comments are a great way to communicate with others in the document. So if I've shared this document with someone else, I can see comments, and we can chat inside of the document. So it's a great way to communicate with others. You can even tag features and edges and parts with comments. So a great way to chat with others. We have notifications, which I mentioned before. Then we have share, big button for share. And I'm going to go over this in just a bit. That top toolbar is a lot of the administrative stuff in a document. But after that, we start to get into a lot of the modeling, right? So mates, in this case, I'm in an assembly. I see a toolbar with mates, right? With relations, various assembly functions. So the next thing in the interface that I want to point out is, of course, the toolbar. Just below that, this is where you'll find your tools. In this case, I'm in an assembly, so I see all the different mates. I see an insert parts command, all the different things necessary to piece together an assembly. So you have the toolbar across the top. You have the feature list on the left. So if you're familiar with many other traditional CAD systems out there, the feature list is very much like a timeline, a history of the parts or the features that you've taken to put this together. In this case, I have a list of all my mates, and then of course a list of all the parts in the assembly. So this is my feature list, and then of course I have the Viewcube here on the right. The Viewcube allows me to click on and go to certain orientations. So there's the front, there's the top, there's the left, and I can just left click the cube to go to those model orientations. You even have the ability to click on the corners and go to various trimetric views within the model. So Viewcube is very good for positioning the model in a certain way, or even just indexing the model over, rotating the model around. You also have the options for different displays. So for render modes, I have things like shaded without edges, shaded with hidden edges, right? Hidden edges removed, hidden edges visible. We also have one for translucent and curvature visualization, great for visualization of curvature, where you want to understand how geometry is changing. So different display modes. We have render. We also have a section view command that's under the Viewcube as well, but definitely an important piece of the interface. So those are the important pieces of the interface. You have the toolbar, the feature list, the Viewcube, and one last, and that is the tabs across the bottom. So I mentioned before, you have different tabs in an Onshape document. In this case, I have the bike frame assembly tab. And this is, of course, my assembly. But if I switch tabs to dog bone link, you'll see the icon slightly different. This is a part studio. So this is where I do my part modeling, sketches, features, so on, to create the parts. So you have assembly tabs for putting together assemblies, testing out motion. You have part studios where you do your part modeling, extrudes, revolves, sweeps, lofts, and so on. And then you have other tabs, drawings, for instance, are their own tab, and I'm going to show you that in a second. Imported models, for instance, this is an imported SolidWorks part, is brought in as a tab, and you'll see here's the imported SolidWorks part. So when you import files, they're shown as a tab. I even have a PDF inside of this document. So you can even import PDFs into an Onshape document and view them natively inside of Onshape. So a great way to bring in miscellaneous data. But again, just kind of driving home that idea that the document is a container for the entire project. In this example, my project is a mountain bike. So I have all the top level assembly and all the parts, all the drawings, even PDFs in this document. Okay, so a few basic things about manipulating the model. This is my assembly, but in the case of parts, it's just the same. How do we manipulate the model? And the first thing I want to mention is the rotate. So we have rotate, pan, and zoom. To rotate, right mouse, hold down the right mouse and drag the mouse around. You get rotate. Okay. To pan, you can hold down control, right mouse, and drag, and you'll get pan. Now, if your mouse has a middle wheel, you can physically press that wheel down, and that will also give you pan. But that's only for those that have that wheel. So you have rotate, pan, and the last is, of course, zoom. You zoom by scrolling with the cursor. Okay. The important thing to keep in mind is it zooms to wherever the cursor is. So you got to move the cursor to wherever you want to zoom in on, then scroll the cursor. Okay. You scroll in and out to zoom in and out. So that's rotate, pan, and zoom. Let's get started with building a real part. Now, what I'd like to walk you through is building a simple link for this mountain bike frame. In fact, it's this dog bone link or something very similar to this. So we're going to walk through this process. Now, if you're just getting started, you're going to be started with a blank document, a blank part, and a blank assembly. Now, in this case, I have a few other parts, but the process is really the same. I need to create a new part studio. To do this, in the very bottom left corner, you'll see a little plus icon. To create a new part, a new drawing, a new assembly, you just click Create Tab, and then choose, in this case, Create Part Studio. Okay. So now that I have a new Part Studio, you'll see a new tab has been added to the document, Part Studio 1, and I have a blank part. Okay. You're always given an origin, a top, front, and right plane. So those are your basic building blocks to start your part modeling. Important thing to point out, this is a part studio, and in Onshape, you can model multiple parts together in a part studio. Right. So in this case, we're going to keep it simple, though, just that single dog bone link. So let's get started. Now I want to start a sketch on the front plane. To do this, I'll left-click the front plane in the graphics, then click the sketch icon in the toolbar. Now one last step that's important is rotating normal to the sketch plane. Right now the front plane is somewhat askew compared to my view. So what I'd like to do is rotate that around so I'm looking normal to the sketch plane. To do this, I can right-click anywhere in the graphics, and you'll see the option View Normal to Sketch Plane. You'll see that rotates the model around. Now I'm looking straight at the front plane. Very important thing in Onshape, not just for sketching or features, but just in general, the right-click menu. And the right-click menu is where that View Normal to Sketch Plane option is, but it's a very useful thing in Onshape in general. So worth trying out, right-clicking a feature or sketch, or if you're trying to find something, the right-click menu can be very helpful. So now I'm in a sketch on the front plane. Notice that I have a sketch dialog that has appeared in the top left here, and all my tools are different. Right? A moment ago, I had sweeps and lofts and all these different part editing tools. Now I have sketch tools. Lines, rectangles, circles, all the things that I'd expect to see in a sketch environment. So now I can start sketching. Now I'm not going to go into too great a detail about what a line or an arc. I think most users understand that. There are some basic things I want to point out about Onshape in general when it comes to sketching. The first is many of these tools have variations. So you'll see little drop-down arrows. Make sure to check those out. We have two different forms of rectangle, for example, and it just depends how you want to define your rectangle. Right? So just realize that there are some drop-down menus to allow you to choose different types of tools. Right? Now, in my case, I want to start with a simple center point circle. right? So I'm going to start with a circle, left click, and as I move my cursor out, notice that the cursor is now a crosshair. It's indicating that I'm now in a tool, right? I'm no longer I no longer have the cursor active, right? So I give that visual feedback letting me know that I'm in a command. And as I move my cursor around the origin, you'll see it highlight at different points. So right there, it highlights, indicating that I'm horizontal to the origin. Right? So you get this visual feedback letting you know you're constraining relative to the origin. Right? Now, if I want to actually attach my circle to the origin, I move my cursor over the origin and notice that the visual cue there, that the constraint has changed. So now I'm attaching that circle to the origin as opposed to just making it horizontal. Right? So you get these visual cues, these snaps in the behavior when you're sketching. Now I want to place the first circle on the origin. So I move my cursor over the origin, left click, move my cursor up, down, left, or right. With a circle, it doesn't matter. And then just left click again. So simple circle. Some things I want to point out about this. First, you're still in the circle command. So if you're done drawing circles and you want to exit, you can use the escape key to exit any sketch tool. Right? So that's the easy way to get out of the sketch tool. You can also go back and click the button. Escape seems to be the common method. Another thing I want to point out is notice that the inside of the circle is shaded slightly darker than the outside of the graphics. And the reason behind that is in Onshape, closed contours that are usable in extrudes, revolves, sweeps, and lofts are indicated as closed by shading. So you don't have to hunt for missing edges. If the contour is closed, you'll know it because it's a slightly darker shade. Now, you also have level of definition. So if you've come from a traditional CAD system, you'll notice that the circle is blue, and if I left click and drag it, it changes in size. Now I need to define the diameter of the circle. We're going to cover that in just a bit. But our goal, like in many of the traditional CAD applications, is to have a fully defined sketch that's completely black. Right? So let's move on. Now I have my first circle in place. We're going to do that one more time. Circle. I'm going to use a horizontal constraint to the origin. So again, notice as I move my cursor up, I get that reference to the origin. Right? A horizontal constraint, left click, and I have a second circle. Okay. Again, I'll use the escape key to escape out of that. Now that I have a few circles, let's add some dimensions. So we really don't know what the size of these are, nor do we know how far they are apart, and we use dimensions to accomplish that. So I select dimension from the toolbar. Then I select the circle, just left click, move my dimension to where I want to place it, and left click again. This is a diameter of 25. Enter. And now you'll notice the entire sketch scales to match that first dimension. So notice that I had to zoom in there, and that's because all of the other sketch entities scale to match that first value. Also notice that the circle on the left is black, but the circle on the right is blue. Again, giving you that visual feedback of the level of definition that you have. The circle on the left is fully defined. The circle on the right is underdefined. Right? So I don't have a size for the circle, nor do I know how far it is apart. Your goal with every sketch, again, not a rule, but best practice, is to fully define your sketches. So let's move forward. Again, dimension. I'll dimension the second circle. This time, diameter of 20. Again, still not fully defined, but closer. Right? So the circle diameter cannot be changed, but the distance is not defined. And one of the best ways to understand why it's underdefined is just to left click and drag it and see where it moves. Remember that you can always undo. And that's one important thing I haven't pointed out yet. You do have an undo here in the top left, which allows you to go back one step. So one more dimension. left click dimension, I'll click the center point of this circle, the center point of this circle, then move my dimension down, left click again, and we'll punch in 85. So we have two fully defined circles. Now that we've gotten this far, I want to draw a line joining them. And I want to take that line and mirror it. So first, I want to draw a construction line to mirror everything about. Now, any construction geometry is done in a very similar fashion. You select the tool that you want, in this case, line. Then you select the construction command from the toolbar. Right, so I selected line, construction. Now when I draw my line, it's construction geometry and not solid geometry. Okay. Now, for those not familiar with the difference, the main difference is when you go to create a feature, construction geometry is ignored. Right? Only solid lines or solid geometry in general is used for feature creation. Construction geometry is just there to help you construct the sketch. So I have a construction line here. Now I want to draw another line, this time solid, right, from circle to circle. And notice as I move my cursor over the circle, it highlights, again giving that visual feedback that it's snapping to that circle. Left click, and now I have that line. A good question. Does undo go back one step or one step at a time? Would multiple undo clicks take you back multiple steps? Yes, multiple undo clicks would take you back multiple steps. A tip is you can right-click the undo button and you'll get a list of the last few steps that you've done. Okay. So just keep that in mind. You can go back, just single left-click undo goes back one step at a time. But if you right-click that, you get a list of each step that it's going to go back to. Now, keep in mind this is totally independent of history, which has its own recording, and you can restore from there as well. Okay, so I have my simple line here. I want to mirror this line to the other side. Now, the question may come up, well, why not just draw another line? And the answer is you could, and you could do constraints to later center them. But in my case, I want to make sure these lines are centered, and that's what the mirror gives me. So I'll select mirror from the toolbar, select the construction line as my mirror line, then select the entity I want to mirror, which is this line, and it mirrors it to the other side. Now, of course, the big benefit to a mirror is that I get symmetry, right? So when I move or I add a dimension later on, it stays centered over that construction line. So last step here, we'll add a dimension to define the height. Now, before I extrude, I want to add two more simple circles. So I'm going to go select center point circle. Now, I'm going to deliberately draw these circles out of place. Let's just draw them here and here. Now, in your case, you wouldn't do this, but I want to illustrate a point. So I'm deliberately drawing these circles out in space. I want to constrain them myself. Okay. Question that's popped up. Can you selectively hide a dimension? That's a good question. I don't believe you can turn off the display of individual dimensions. You have an on and off for all dimensions, but selectively hiding them, I don't believe so. I think that may be a limitation. Okay, so I've sketched these two circles. They're somewhat in space. They're just kind of randomly placed. My goal with them is, of course, to make them centered inside of these circles or concentric with them. What I really want to cover here is how to add constraints, because much of what we've done so far, basically everything we've done so far, has been automatically constrained. The circle was attached here. I have dimensions attaching, and references horizontal. All that stuff was created automatically. And in fact, you can take a look at all the constraints with this checkbox. You'll see show constraints. And it turns on all the different little constraints that were created automatically, essentially, in this sketch. So if you need to go and find the constraint and delete it, you can click on the flag here and delete it. My point in this is that much of this is automatic, but there will be situations where you need to constrain the geometry yourself. And so I want to walk you through that process. So let's just say, for example, that first thing, I want both of these circles to have the same diameter. Right? Of course, I could dimension them and dimension each one independently, but I want them linked to each other. So the first thing I can do is create an equal constraint. You'll see equal constraint here in the toolbar on the far right. So all I do is left click, then select equal. Okay. Now both of those circles have the same diameter. Okay. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to center or make this circle concentric with this circle. Again, left click, choose concentric from the toolbar. Okay. Again, left click, concentric. And so it really doesn't matter what the constraint is or what the geometry is. The process is really the same. You left click the entities and you select the constraint type that you want. Right? So now the only thing we really have to do here is define a diameter of 12. Okay. Question that's come up in terms of not supported browsers: is the Edge browser supported? Forgive me. No, not yet. That's something that we're watching very, very closely. Right now, WebGL is just not up to snuff in the Edge browser to run. It's definitely something we're watching, but not as of today. It's not supported. Okay, so we're ready to extrude. I've got my fully defined sketch here, and I want to extrude this. So I'm done. I'm going to go straight to the extrude command in the toolbar. Right, so I go to extrude. I'm going to rotate the model a bit just to see it, and you'll see a preview of my extrude. Right, now you have options for, you can extrude, set your extrude direction. You can set your end condition. But in my case, I want a simple extrude 25 millimeters. So I enter my depth, 25 millimeters. I hit the green check, OK. And now I have my first feature. Now a question that's come up is, well, how do you measure? And with Onshape, measures built in. So if I wanted to know, for instance, the distance between these two circles, I'd left-click the circle, and you'll see in the bottom right corner is measure. And it gives you the minimum distance. If I left-click a circle, it gives me the diameter of that circle. So the measure is integrated. Just select the entity. If I wanted, an edge length, for instance, I'd select the edge, and you'll see the length here in the bottom right. Question, and this is a good one: why did the inner circle form a hole? And in this case, let's go back to our first sketch here. Remember that I sketched two circles on the inside. These are referred to as nested contours. And on Onshape, we automatically recognize these nested contours as holes in this case. So you don't have to go back and create a separate cut. Now, if I don't want the holes there, obviously I can delete these circles or convert them to construction geometry so they're ignored. But in my case, I don't need to come back and create a separate cut for those holes. By creating a circle inside of the circle, I create a nested contour, which gives me the same impact. Okay. Another important thing I want to point out about this is, unlike a lot of traditional CAD applications, you don't have to trim sketches or have to worry about having one closed contour. With Onshape, you can extrude the entire sketch, even if there's multiple overlapping contours. It automatically determines the contour you want to use, but you can also go in and change that and extrude any piece of the sketch. Okay, so I've got my first feature done. What I'd like to do is create my second. And remember, our goal here is we're creating this dog bone link, right? And this dog bone link has a small bend in it, so we're going to create another feature. This time, though, we're going to create it on the top plane. So I'm going to go click the top plane, then click Sketch, okay, and then right-click View Normal to Sketch Plane. Now, a question related to the one earlier: what if I didn't want the hole to be cut all the way through? Then you'd need to create a separate cut, right? In the case of a nested contour, when I'm extruding like that, it assumes that they all have the same end condition, the same depth. You could create a separate cut using the same sketch, but it would need to be a separate feature in that case. Okay, so I'm in my sketch. Again, I've selected the top plane. I hit the sketch button, and I use the right click to go normal to. And now I can start sketching. So what I'm going to do is just start with a simple line. So we'll go line, angled line, and another line. And we'll add a few dimensions to this. Okay. Left click the two lines. Notice that because the two lines are not parallel, it assumes that I want an angle dimension, right? So 170 is my angle. We want a 9mm offset here. And I want 20mm from the origin. Okay. So we're very close to a fully defined sketch. And in fact, at a first glance, it looks like it's fully defined, but the endpoints are not. Right? So if I left click and drag, the endpoints are still underdefined. And that's okay. I have one more step that I'd like to do here. What I want to do is I want to take all three of these lines and offset them all at once. Instead of drawing another closed line and just finishing this profile, I can use the offset tool. And then if I left click and drag one of these lines, the entire chain of lines creates an offset. Right? So it's very easy to offset all three lines, just left click and drag, and I want an offset of 8mm. Okay. Then we can sketch a few lines to close this contour. Now, again, still not fully defined. I still need to constrain the ends of these. The next tool I want to point out here is what we call use, and you'll see it right here in the sketch toolbar, and it's a very useful tool for converting existing faces. So essentially what I want is I want a line right on the end of this radius. Remember, these are radiuses here on the end. I'll use the use command, and as I move my cursor over that radius, notice that I get a pink line appearing. If I left click on it, it converts that silhouette or that radius to a line. And the nice thing is now I can just attach my geometry to it. Now, you may ask, well, why all the effort? Why even bother? Just leave it out, extend it out in space. And the benefit of this is it will update if you change the model later. If I made this model longer, if I change the radius or whatever it was, because it's constrained or attached to the radius edge, it will update. If I just simply left it extending out like I do here, if the model changes, this may not update. It will not update the way I'd expect, right? So it's more about design intent. So I'll select use. I'll again see the pink line, left click, and it converts. And then I can just drag my line until it attaches, right? So now I've got a fully defined sketch, right? My shape is fully defined. I'm ready to extrude. Again, we'll do another extrude. Now this time, instead of extruding in a single direction, I want to extrude symmetric. And symmetric just means it's extruding in both directions, right? The amount is still the same, 25mm. It's just extruding in both directions instead of a single direction. Now, the other options I want to point out is you not only have the ability to create or add a new feature to an existing part, but in our example, you can actually do things like cut right inside the extrude. And that's a commonly asked question is, well, what if I don't want to add? What if I wanted to cut the part? Right? That's not a different icon. It's just the remove option. You'll see that cuts the part. So you have the ability to set whether you want a new part, you want to add to an existing part, you want to cut or remove, or you can choose what we call intersect. Intersect will give you just the bodies that intersect the two, just the two that overlap. All right? Only what's shared between them. And in our case, it's exactly what we need for our simple dog bone link shape. Okay? So we've created two simple extrudes. Again, probably if you've come from a traditional CAD system, this is a very familiar thing. You know, simple sketches and extrudes. We have fillets and chamfers and shells and holes and all the tools that you'd expect to see. So let's show you real quickly a fillet, and we'll do real simple 30 millimeter fillet, and we'll select edges here, 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 and here. And we can do another fillet. This time we'll make it 15. Again, just selecting edges where you'd like to radius. So I'm sure for those that have, experience with the traditional CAD application, this is a similar workflow to what you're used to. If you have experience with 3D CAD, it's very similar. What I'd like to point out next is where we start to get into some things that are different. In particular, sharing and collaboration. As I mentioned before, you can collaborate with others in real time. The way you can do this is with Share. Now, Share is built in. You'll see it in the top right there. And it's very easy to use. If you've ever used Google Docs, it's a very similar workflow. Right? All you do is you click Share, and you type in their email address. Even if they don't have an Onshape account, we create one on the fly for them. Now, it's important to point out you want to look at the permissions and define what kind of permission do you want to give this person. If all you want to do is let them look at it, that's can view, just view permissions. You also have the ability to give them permission to view and add comments. And then you have edit and share permissions. So very important thing to point out. Check the permissions and see what kind of permissions you want to give them. In this case, I'll give them can edit and share. I hit share, and instantly they're able to get access to the document. So they don't have to install any viewers. You don't have to email any files. You don't have to explain the process. They just get a link. They click on it, and then they're in the same document you are. In fact, you can see a little icon indicating that they're in the document. Right? So you'll see little icon here, indicating that they are in your document. Right? So pretty neat. We can interact in real time. We can work together even in a document. He can add features while I'm working on assembly, or we can even work together on the same thing. And the neat thing about this is you'll see it update in real time. So if I were to change the appearance, for instance, of this part, you'd see it update live, right? If he were to add a feature, for instance, to this, you're going to see visual cues in the interface letting me know someone else is adding a feature to this part. So you get real-time live updates when multiple people work together in a document. Okay. All right, so we have just a few minutes left. I have a lot of different things I want to show you, but basics of part modeling are there. You have your simple sketch, extrude, revolve, sweeps, and lofts, and all the tools that you'd expect to have in part modeling. Now let's jump into some assembly modeling. Now, assemblies in Onshape are really about motion. If I need to test movement out, remember that you can model multiple parts together in a part studio. So if nothing moves, there may not be a reason to build an assembly. But if you need to test motion, assemblies are the solution. And so what I have here is just a simple bike frame. And what I'd like to do is insert that part that we just modeled into this bike frame and made it up, assemble it. So in the assembly, first thing to notice, the toolbar is just a bit different. Instead of having features or sketch icons, you have assembly tools, right? And the first one is insert part. So you'll see insert part, and it just lists all the different parts in the document, right? So you have a list of all the different parts. You select the one you want, and you left click where you want to place it. Okay. I'll hit the green check. Now I've inserted that part, the part we just modeled, into this assembly. Now I need to assemble it. When you first insert these parts, they're just free floating. They move around the screen. There's nothing constraining them. What I need to do is mate this to the bottom of the shock mount here. Right? Now we do this with, of course, mates. Now if you have experience with traditional CAD applications, mates and Onshape are a bit different. We use a higher level system of mates that a lot of times simplifies the process. So in many situations, you may have 2 or 3 mates to locate a part like this in a traditional CAD application. With Onshape, this is one revolute mate. So I select revolute mate, and the way we use mates in Onshape is we use mate connectors, or points. The way to think of them is points. And I take a point from one part and a point from another part, and I bring them together. And I define the degrees of freedom, or the movement, based on the type of mate that I choose. Right? So I'll select revolute, and then as I mouse over the part that we modeled, you'll notice all these mate connectors appear. These white dots appear. And these are all different reference points for attaching my part to the shock mount. In this case, I'll choose this inside mate connector. Okay, actually, let's rotate that. We'll choose the inside mate connector here. Okay, and we'll choose the mate connector on the outside of the shock mount there, and it brings them together. So again, the way to think of it is, taking a mate connector from one part and another part and bringing them together. Right? Now, you can flip the alignment. So if it's backwards or upside down, you can flip the alignment. You can also flip the secondary position or set the angle, the rotation. In this case, it's free to move in any direction, so it's fine. Now, you'll notice that, I can mate the part, but if I want to move the part, I can left click and drag it. But if I left click on it, just left click and not drag, you have a triad to manipulate it. So I'm going to rotate this part around, right? And get it in a similar position to its finished spot, right? Then we'll do the revolute mate. I'll select that hole and the hole in the base, and it brings them together. Okay, so now I've flipped the part around and it's facing the correct direction. Okay. Now, one thing I want to point out is the Animate. There's a big play button here, and it's one of the best ways to understand the movement that you have. So if I hit play, you'll see that this part is free to spin, and that's the revolute mate. It has that one rotational degree of freedom. But you also have other mate types, and one of the easiest ways to learn the different mates is to just try a different mate and hit play. So you can quickly learn what the different mates do by just flipping through them, and you don't have to exit the command and select a different icon. You can choose the different mate types on the fly, right? So I can choose slider, for instance, play, and I can see that slider mate has the one linear degree of freedom, but isn't able to rotate, right? So you can choose different mates and flip through them and try them out. Okay? So we'll do one more mate, this time a cylindrical mate, which has the linear degree of freedom as well. And we'll select the inside of our link, and we'll choose the outside of the arm. One thing I want to point out here, notice that it looks as though, at least in the initial preview, that it's broken the initial mate. See how the part shifts down? That's because we only solve for the active mate. So in the actual mate dialog, you're only going to see the active mate solve. You can click solve, and it solves for all mates in the assembly, and you'll see that part goes back to its correct location. But just an important thing to keep in mind when you're initially adding mates, don't be thrown by a part shifting out of position just while in the mate dialog. If you want to see the finished result, hit solve, and it will solve for all the mates. And so now I hit the green check, and the ultimate test is, of course, if I left click and drag the swing arm here, I get the correct motion that I'd expect to see out of the rear shock. So the main thing here is all about, in assemblies we're testing motion. So the arm needed to be free to rotate and pivot so that this thing is capable of moving up and down. Okay, so that's simple part modeling and, of course, assembly modeling. The key thing to keep in mind with the assembly models and mates in particular are the mate connectors. We take one point from a part, one point from another part, and bring them together. And you really define the movement based on the type of mate that you choose. The last thing I want to show you is drawings. And creating a drawing of your part is, of course, the necessary step to taking this and having it manufactured. Now, creating a drawing is very similar to creating a part or an assembly. The process is the same. You go to the bottom left, Create tab menu, the bottom left corner, and you select Create Drawing. Now, initially, you're going to be greeted with drawing template options, and you have a number of different options. If you're just getting started, I'd recommend choosing an Onshape provided template. You can customize a template, kind of build one on the fly. So if you have an odd standard that you don't use a lot, or if you want to just kind of modify it on the fly, you can. You can import DWT files and use them as your template, so that's also an option. But just keep in mind the first step in the process is choosing the template. If you're just getting started, I would choose one of the Onshape templates, and you can even tweak it later if you decide to. So I'll choose a simple ISO A4, and it creates a blank drawing. Some things that are worth pointing out here. Drawing is just another tab. So you'll see in the document, I have another tab called Drawing 1, and then I can start to insert the parts that I want, right? So I can choose Part Studio 1, which is the part we built, and I can start inserting views. I can project off of those, creating front views and top views very easily. Of course, the toolbar is different. So you have your drawing views, you have your dimension tools, your annotation tools, the things you'd expect to see in your drawings. A question that's come up: is mirror available in an assembly? And the answer is no. We do have a replicate function that gives you similar behavior, but mirror itself is not available in assembly. I will say that their mirror is in Part Studios, so you can mirror parts. It's just in a multi-part studio, not an assembly. And it is a bit of a different workflow if you've come from a traditional CAD system, but in Onshape, all part modeling is done in the Part Studio. So I've inserted a few simple views: front, top, right. I can even do this to create a simple isometric view here in the corner. I can do things like create section views. Here's a vertical section view. Right. I can do detailed views. Just draw a simple circle and create a detail view. So very easy to create views. Then you have your dimension tools. Now the dimension tools, the tool that you choose is dependent on the type of dimension that you're trying to create. So a lot of dimensions are going to be simple 2-point linear dimensions. Point, dimension, right? Point, dimension. So very easy to add those, but you will have situations where you need a point line or a line to line type of dimension. We also have dimensions for angle values, right? So there's my angle value, 3-point arc dimension, 3-point angular dimensions, excuse me. Radius dimensions, right? So we can define, the radius like so. Diameter dimensions. Again, all I'm doing is left clicking and then left clicking in space where I want to place the actual dimension. So very easy to do. Then we have some of the other annotation types, things like datums. You can attach datums to geometry. Tolerance symbols, geometric tolerance blocks. We also have generic notes. So you can add notes to your drawing. You can fill out the title block. If you just need a notes to deburr edges, for example, you can do that. Balloons, tables, construction lines, and so on. So I'm running out of time, but I think you kind of get the idea. Once you've modeled your part, you've assembled it, everything's good to go, you'll need to document it with a drawing. And it's just another tab in the document. You can have as many sheets in a drawing as you'd like. So the question that often comes up is, do I need one drawing or one tab per drawing? And the answer is no. You can create as many sheets as you'd like. You can have all the drawings in the entire document in one drawing tab, just having multiple sheets. Okay, so that's really what I had planned for today. I'm going to stick around. I see a few more questions I'm going to stick around and answer, but going forward, if you're just getting started in Onshape, I really encourage you to try Onshape in your professional work and let us know what you think. There's a feedback mechanism I showed you earlier. Really encourage you to give us feedback. Let us know what you think. We really, at this stage, really value every bit of user input that we can get. So we appreciate your time in it, and we really encourage you to try it and let us know. Also, invite others and share your document. Big benefit of the collaborative aspect of Onshape is sharing, so definitely worth trying out. Also, if you've been using Onshape a while and you're interested in establishing a local user group, maybe meeting local users, we'd love to help. We'd love to help you set it up and get things started. So that's really what I had. Again, I'm going to stick around and answer any questions. So if you have them, feel free to type them in. But that's it, everyone. Thank you and have a good day.